I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. Welcome back to the show, Stewart, and Happy New Year.
Thank you, Jim, and Happy New Year to you.
The Kinder Morgan pipeline expansion, I mean, federally it has approval. It's still tied up in the courts. Is this thing ever going to happen?
Well, 2018 is going to be the year when they finally do get the permits they need. We saw in late 2017 that some of the permits from the municipal level were being held back for reasons that could not be defended in court. Kinder Morgan deserves and has to get those permits so it can do its work. And that work's going to happen in 2018 into 2019. They are a little behind schedule, but they seem determined to press ahead. And when you wonder, why is it? Why are they so determined? And you look at all of the reasons why the investment of $7 billion or so is being made, there's quite a list of reasons. And I think it's easy to forget when we rely on the nightly news to, give us a headline of protests. Usually, if we hear about a pipeline, usually it's because there's a few people protesting it. But the real story of pipelines, especially this one, is the prosperity, the environmental protection, the social gains for everybody that comes from having this kind of resource available to us.
Well, I think it's ironic. In Seattle, they have protests asking for a pipeline because they know how dangerous it is to transport petrochemicals by rail car.
That's right. And in the cold snap, there are people in the northeast of the U.S. who a while ago were protesting a natural gas pipeline, have decided after the cold snap that maybe they should have that natural gas because that's how you get affordable, clean energy into your home so you can heat it in times like this. Other times too, but especially you notice it when it's so cold out. So they're kind of kicking themselves out there in New Hampshire that they were pushing back for so long on a project so much that it went away and didn't get built.
How well are the wind farms working for Alberta in minus 30 temperatures?
It's funny, I was passing through Alberta a few days ago during the cold snap. It was 30 below in Edmonton, and there's a little Twitter account that tracks where the energy comes from into the electricity grid in Alberta. You can follow it, which I do because I'm interested in this stuff. But at middle of the afternoon on this cold day with no wind, the wind supply was virtually zero, and almost all of the energy that people were using in Alberta was coming from fossil fuels, coming from mainly coal, also natural gas. And as we know, there's a movement to change that to end our dependence, but you've got to wonder if there are days like that in those conditions where we don't have any wind, even though they do have actually already a lot of wind infrastructure in Alberta, yet it produces nothing. What's it going to be like if it's 100% wind reliance, but there's no wind? That's a pretty scary prospect.
I'm wondering how well does solar work when it's foggy? Because right now I can't see the end of my block in Vancouver because it's fogged in.
Yeah, fog is definitely a consideration. And you also wonder if there's an earthquake, or rather, you wonder if there is a major volcanic eruption. And we've had, whether Mount St. Helens or Mount Pinatubo or other ones in our time, in living memory, whether the dust that's in the atmosphere because of that is going to affect large-scale solar production. But, I've been out in Calgary looking at solar there, and there is some, and it was winter when I was looking, and they had snow had fallen on the panels, and I asked the question of the people touring us around, well, what happens if it snows? And they said, well, we don't do anything because the cost of sending someone up there with a broom to clean them off is greater than you would gain in terms of the electricity generated from it. That's the economics, at least in 2017 and 2018 of solar. So, let's hope it improves, and lots of people I know are pinning their hopes on that, but we also have to deal with the reality of the moment, which is that solar is kind of challenging in a lot of circumstances.
I also saw an article that said A one-day eruption by Mount Pinatubo wiped out 10 years of carbon credits.
Well, yeah, Mother Nature can suddenly overturn all of our best intentions pretty quickly.
Well, then how do you argue for changing what we know are reliable sources of energy?
Well, more and more, I'm thinking that if we have, say, 80% of our total energy diet coming from fossil fuels today, globally, and we do, that the idea that we just suddenly have to get off that 80% is not such a good one. Why not take that 80% and innovate and get better at using it, capture the carbon that comes off when we burn fuel, use less of it, have more efficient engines in our cars, make sure that all of our home furnaces are as efficient as they can be. You know, if we do that, we can make much greater gains in these problems than by radically expanding the supply of some of the technologies around solar and some other things that are very expensive, that aren't reliable, that require other technologies like storage that we don't have yet in commercial supply on an affordable basis. You know, when I hear people say, no, we shouldn't innovate fossil fuels, that's only encouraging their use, I really think that's an approach that is going to deepen our problems with climate rather than solve them.
Carbon taxes went up across the country January 1st. How much is that going to alleviate global warming in Canada?
Well, I know there are those who don't see or acknowledge a direct connection, and I think that there's something to that. On the other hand, these carbon taxes in British Columbia, and we've now had them 10 years. 2018 is the 10th anniversary since our 2008 carbon tax was implemented. It was one of the first carbon taxes anywhere in the world. It has been around all this time. It is written about all over the place as a model for how you can do things. It may not be perfect in every way, but you know, it was a tax that came in under the BC Liberal government at that time that allowed us to say we were encouraging better uses of energy and discouraging worse uses. And so that's been I think the reigning dictate. It's not we're going to, fix the world's problems by having this carbon tax. We're going to just do what we can to encourage more responsible behavior. And the evidence is, although it hasn't solved the global climate problems that it wasn't really intended to, it has at least put us on a track to be more likely to purchase automobiles that are more effective, to think twice about using some of the fuels that release carbon. So I do think there's a strong argument, and we've certainly seen the rest of the country adopt the pioneering approach that we've taken, although with different modifications depending on the jurisdiction.
Of course, the BC carbon tax has had the effect of chasing businesses to Washington State.
Carbon leakage, as that's known, is one of the risks. I think it's a real risk, a serious problem. We've heard of already companies in Ontario that, because not so much carbon tax per se, but because of much higher energy costs overall, have decided that Canada or Ontario is not a place to do business in. Let's go south to Kentucky or some other states. Maybe it's just across the line to Ohio, where they can have all of the things they want about the North American manufacturing environment, but not the things they don't want, like high energy costs.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after the break.
I'm Greg Johnston, CEO of Carl Data Solutions, an industrial Internet of Things company that provides big data solutions for monitoring critical infrastructure. Carl Data offers machine learning and predictive analytics features through our cloud-based applications to deliver key asset-saving operational insights from massive amounts of data. Carl Data trades on the CSE, symbol CRL, and the pink symbol CDTAF. For more details on Carl Data, please visit carlsolutions.com.
I'm Bill McWilliam, president of Cascadero Copper, CCD on the TSX Venture Exchange. Cesium is one of the world's rarest metals with a growing industrial demand. Drilling is underway on our Tehran property in Argentina to prove up a cesium resource. Cascadero's patent-pending leach process has the potential to make Cascadero the lowest cost supplier of cesium in the world. Visit our website, cascadero.com, or phone us at 604-924-5504.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Stewart Muir. Stewart, fish farms have been a fact of BC business life now for several decades. Now there's a lawsuit involving a salmon farm. Can you maybe explain that, and what are the pros and cons?
Well, yes, salmon farming is a really important industry. It had a wholesale value of $800 million in 2016. There's 3,000 people who work in it directly, and probably just as many people indirectly, whether it's in the back office and in the companies that provide feed and that sort of thing. So there's like 6,000 people. That's a big chunk, especially in places like North Vancouver Island, where there's not a lot of jobs, not a lot of options. This is a good one because that's where the fish farms are located. And nevertheless, it has, although it hasn't grown rapidly over the last few years, it has attracted some stalwart opponents who say that, look, if you put Atlantic salmon in the Pacific waters, there's inevitably going to be problems. There's going to be problems with sea lice or viruses and this sort of thing. And there's much disputed science as to whether this is a real threat or not. But nevertheless, it's one that the industry has taken very seriously. You've seen their procedures get ever tighter, and they've spent more on all the things that you might say are the right things to ensure that they're farming properly and responsibly. But still, we've seen this opposition to the farms, and it came to the head recently. Some protesters decided they would occupy a salmon farm site up in the northern part, north of the Strait of Georgia, and they would just squat there and stop the salmon farmers from going about their business by putting their tents on the docks and ramming their boats into the farm, and even making some threats that, if you look at the words that have been spoken, the threats that have been made, it's a pretty hostile atmosphere, and I'm not surprised that it got to the Supreme Court recently, where we saw, I think, a very good judgment come out a few days before Christmas.
And what was that BC Supreme Court judgment?
Well, the justice ruled that an injunction to stop these protesters from invading that farm interfered with their operations. It prevented the harvest and removal of salmon, and it should not be permitted. So they've been ordered off, and that farm is again allowed to continue about its business. But, if you drill in a little bit to what was going on, it's kind of disturbing. They were saying things like, the quickest way to stop this would be to stalk the employees and find out where they live. There was one talk from one of these protesters about getting his knife out. We don't know what that meant, but clearly in the judge's mind, there was sufficient reason to put an end to the trespassing of this very legitimate and beneficial business that was going on there. So I think that's a blow for good common sense and economic freedom for people to have jobs that support their families on Vancouver Island.
Now, are they moving to try to entrap some of the waste and so on that comes from these salmon farms? Well,
you often hear people say, look, I'm fine with salmon farming as long as they do it on the land, where they just need to build some big swimming pools and put the fish in there, and then I'll be fine with salmon farming. And the industry's looked at that solution. It's very, very expensive, as you could imagine, especially with energy use. It's probably 10 times as much energy required to raise salmon on land. If we do that, it would be a globally uncompetitive industry in BC, because no one else does that for this kind of salmon farming. And in BC, there is some on-land farming. There's some specialty farming. It's a great way to go for the right commodity. But for the salmon farming, it hasn't proved out. So the reality is, if we want to have a salmon farming industry in BC that is of any scale, it needs to be in the water. And so the question becomes, well, are we following the rules? Do we have rules that are sufficient to protect the water and other fish, like passing fish that are migrating to their home rivers to lay their eggs? Are we making sure they are protected? And you start to look at the professionals we have in BC in the salmon farming industry, the procedures we have, the rules and regulations and government inspections they're subject to. It is a really bewildering complexity. The operating environment they have is just as stringent as it is for raising animals on land or for doing, any other thing we have. So I think if you start to look into it, and I know this is difficult. I know there's people listening to this who are saying, oh, this guy's full of it. This is a terrible industry. Well, I think if you take a little bit of time, start to understand what it is that people actually do out there, it's a pretty darn good story we have in BC around salmon farming.
How can you counter the propaganda that goes along with this? And quite often this propaganda is funded by foreign countries and foreign companies that are in a competitive position.
Yeah, there often is, motivations behind that. I think if all we do is kind of lecture each other, you're right, no, I'm right, you're wrong, we never get anywhere. You just never can move forward. And I think the more important thing is, how can we get better at listening to one another, even if we don't agree with each other or even don't even like each other, because it's essential. And I think it's going to be up to people who've got jobs in industries like salmon farming. I'd say the same about, oil sands or natural gas too, where they have to understand that in the communities where they live, there are lots of people like them who depend on these industries. They need to get their voices together. They need to talk to their elected officials, whether that's the mayor or council or their MLAs or their MPs. You can call those people up. You can send them a letter. You don't even need a stamp. You just need to take a few minutes and write out what it means to you, because that's what I think has the most powerful effect, just the honest, genuine stories that you've got. That is pure gold. The politicians really appreciate hearing from people who've got something to say like that. And, if you're kind of sick of just carping about things, there are things that any person can do that don't cost you anything.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after the break.
Cypress Development Corp's flagship lithium project is located just east of Albemarle's Silver Peak mine in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. A 12-hole exploration drill program for lithium-enriched claystone on Cypress's 100% controlled properties is now underway. Cypress Development Corp trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the pink CYDVF, and on Frankfurt's C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
Keep informed. Receive our weekly recap of thought-provoking articles, podcasts, and radio delivered to your inbox for free. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage, HowStreet.com. Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, taking a look at the top businesses in British Columbia in 2017, how many are directly tied to natural resources?
Well, it depends how you measure it. It's actually quite a challenging one to measure. It is as much as 34-35% of the economy. Some say it's larger. One of the reasons it's harder to see is that, unlike, say, tourism, where you can spot a cruise ship, you can see a restaurant, you can see a hotel. If you're walking down, say, downtown Vancouver, down Howe Street or Hastings Street, you're passing people just going to work. They don't have a sign saying, I work at a mining company, or I work at a law firm that does conveyancing for the natural gas industry, or I work in forestry because I'm a lumber broker. They don't have those signs on. You can't tell. They're just someone on the street. And yet, downtown Vancouver and all of our cities really are just full of people who do that. And they're not walking down the street carrying a chainsaw either if they work in forestry. Yeah, there's someone out there doing that, but not downtown. And so it's almost invisible, but the impact of it is, if you go into, I would challenge anyone listening, go into any downtown office block, whether it's one of the big tall towers or just one of those nondescript little 8-10 story buildings. Have a look at the lobby directory of who's in there. It is stuffed with mining companies, forest companies, shipping companies that have to get those products to places. You have to conclude that there's a lot of people in jobs that you don't see normally that are dependent on resources. So it really is big. I mean, never mind the statistics. I think that's just, something that anyone can go and see for themselves.
Well, the Port of Vancouver, Canada's biggest, how much of that they ship out every day is generated by our natural resources? It's
80%, approximately. It has been for a long time. I know you'll find people who say, resources are declining, tourism is going to take over. Well, that's actually not borne out by any statistics I've ever seen, because it stays around the same as a percentage, 80%. And, fortunately, other industries like tourism are growing too, and that's fantastic. And technology, high tech, that's growing too. Wonderful. But the fact is that natural resources really have maintained, even though they're sort of invisible for the reasons I've said, they've maintained their share of the economy. So it's really too early quite unnecessary to write the epitaph of the resource industries in Canada when they remain the central driving factor in our whole economy.
How important is it to get that message out to governments like Vancouver Mayor Robertson, who wants to ban natural gas?
Yeah, it's critically important that those politicians get a message, because they might like to signal to us the virtue they have as enlightened individuals who love bicycles and like to build bike lanes. And yeah, we can credit them for that. I'm prepared to give credit. But at the same time, I would love to see the year when the current mayor of Vancouver troubles himself to go to the biggest mining exhibition that occurs in BC, probably the second biggest one in Canada, every January, the Roundup Conference. It's happening later this month in Vancouver. There's going to be maybe 6,000 people coming to the city. They're going to be spending a lot of money on restaurants and hotels and going to the hockey games. They're going to be having a great old time. They'll be dropping millions of dollars. And normally when there's a big convention in town, you'll get City Hall kind of excited about that. They might even put out a news release, welcome to the orthodontist or something. But I have yet to see our City Hall say, welcome to the miners who've come to our city, because they just don't want to admit that mining is really one of the biggest parts of our economy. And I think that it's really unfortunate, because if you're one, say, who's planning a future that you think includes a lot of electric vehicles, those electric cars need all kinds of mineral elements that have to be mined. You can get some of it from recycling, sure, but the world population is growing. We need more. More has to be mined from the ground. Where are we going to get it from? Well, if we've got our government in BC saying, no, we're not going to build a new mine, we're going to reject that, it's got to come from somewhere else. And as it stands right now today, BC and Vancouver are global leaders in mining sustainability, making sure that the social benefits of having mines are responsibly distributed amongst the people who do the work and whose communities the mines occur in. So this is something we should be really proud of, and I think the city of Vancouver has the ability to set a good example there. So maybe they'll do that in a future time.
Where did the materials come from to make the mayor's bicycle?
That's a good question, because there's steel there, there's rubber, there's aluminum, there's all these elements. If it's aluminum, it might have come from Kitimat up the coast. It might have been steel that was manufactured in China using coal, perhaps from BC, that was shipped out there, used to build the steel tubing that was used to build the bicycle, and then shipped back. And then the paint, the paint, maybe it's got some titanium in it, so maybe they had to mine that in Australia and ship it to China, the titanium powder to get that paint, and on and on and on. All of it has to be mined, as you know, Jim.
Stewart, just where is that Roundup conference, and will you be there?
Oh, I will be there. It's the week of the 23rd, and it goes through much of that week. It's in Vancouver. They basically take over the Vancouver Convention Center. If you're down in that area during that last week of January, you can't turn around without tripping over a miner or a mineral explorer. They're going to be here. There's going to be, very quietly, people from all across the country, and premiers will be zipping in and out of town to have meetings. This is a big deal. It's a global show that is I think very much underappreciated.
Stewart, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you, Jim.
And all the best in the new year.
Same to you.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. They're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Follow us on Twitter @HowStreet. Our very popular YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show or our guests can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.